In recent years, it's been a hot topic whether or not guns should have more restrictions applied to them. Today we're going to be discussing the topic of gun control. Ethan?
So I am for gun control, at least in certain forms, because I believe gun control can save lives. In 2013 alone, there were 33,636 deaths in the United States due to gun wounds. 502 of those were from mass shootings, and over 21,000 were from suicide. By simply increasing the rigor and background checks, those lives could be saved. In fact, 40% of gun purchases are private and undocumented, meaning that 40% of gun owners felt the need to avoid the federal regulations already in place. By simply extending these rules, how many of those over 33,000 lives could be saved?
I am against gun control. I feel like there are many things backing my idea. The Second Amendment of the U.S. Constitution states, "A well-regulated militia, being necessary to the security of a free state, the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed." I think this is very clear that guns should not be limited to people. Now, there are different rules. For example, in Chicago, there is a waiting period of 72 hours from purchase to handling of a gun. And there's also a thing called the red flag law, which gives family members or cops the ability to issue an order to confiscate from someone that is deemed immediately dangerous. In addition, just to clarify what a well-regulated militia refers to from the Second Amendment, according to the Hidden Dominion, a well-regulated militia is a group of people who could unite together well and act as a cohesive unit to protect against foreign or domestic harm. So this basically means that anybody has the freedom to own a gun to protect themselves or anyone around there. There's also another point that gun control doesn't really stop criminals, because as Senator Marco Rubio stated, "My skepticism about gun laws is criminals don't follow the law. They don't care what the law is. You can pass any law, but any law you want, and criminals won't follow it." So criminals will get guns whether or not it's by theft, black market, or other criminals handing guns around. Gun control laws do not deter crime. Gun owners deter crime.
So I can agree with you on a lot of those points, Julie, but I also have a few counter-arguments to present. So I do agree that the Second Amendment clearly states that people are to own guns. However, I also feel like there are a few contextual clues in there that we have to take into consideration. So it said that this is in place for state militias to oppose foreign threats in a federal military, but I feel like there's so much spending on the national military these days, which is a different debate for a different time, that the militias would be underwhelmingly insignificant compared to the might of our military. Plus, I believe that this militia concern is more collective than individual. So, as long as there are people who are mentally stable and can wield guns to protect everybody, those who are mentally stable or have trouble controlling their temper, things like that, don't need to wield a gun because there are people who can protect them, and it's better for everyone else if they don't. In addition, I don't feel like the gun control laws need to be so extensive that they violate gun rights. It should be harder to obtain a gun, so that way people who shouldn't have one don't get one. But if you're an ordinary citizen who's done nothing wrong, I feel like there should be nothing stopping you from enjoying your Second Amendment rights. In addition, to prevent criminals from getting illegal guns, I feel like law enforcement would have a lot easier of a time if all guns were made harder to get, because mentally unstable people and such wouldn't go out in public shootings, which cops have to go and stop. They can thus spend this free time that they no longer have to worry about public shootings spent finding illegal gun dealerships and shutting them down.
I think I understand what you're saying, but gun control laws do infringe on the right to self-defense, and they deny people their own safety. According to the NRA, guns are used for self-defense 2.5 million times a year. The police cannot protect everyone all of the time. 61% of men and 56% of women surveyed by Pew result said that stricter gun laws would make it more difficult for people to protect their homes and families. Also, I think that in a perfect world, if everybody obeyed gun control laws, I think there would be no issue with your argument. But the fact is that people who would use a gun wrongly would be the kind of people who would not obey the laws.
All right, so Julie, I agree with you on self-defense being a very important issue in the gun control debate. However, I also feel like I need to speak a little bit on it. So self-defense is only a factor in 1% of crimes of personal contact and in 3% of break-ins. I know you said 2.5 million, but there are probably a lot of crimes in which self-defense isn't a factor compared to that portion where it is. Also, these crimes would be less likely to occur if a criminal didn't have a gun in their possession, because they wouldn't go and do something as risky as breaking into someone's house if they didn't have an armed weapon. And that would therefore decrease the amount of crimes necessary for self-defense because criminals wouldn't have guns. Also, armed civilians never stopped one of the mass shootings from 1982 to 2012, so I feel like the state militias or law enforcement having guns is a bit more important. However, I do understand that the Second Amendment exists and people do want guns, although I do feel like background checks are a great form of gun control to help solve this issue. Even if it would take a citizen a little more time to get a gun because their information's being checked, people who are mentally unstable or have a sign of past crimes wouldn't get a gun in their possession and therefore lower crime rates. In addition, data collected from background checks used for gun control cases, which isn't a lot right now, those laws need to be extended, is completely deleted a day after it's checked and used for the final time, which is usually the day of the background check. So data isn't stored and collected and used to invade people's privacy.
When you mention background checks, I think that's something that is already done. In order to have a concealed weapons permit, you have to have background checks and things like that. It's not a extremely easy process that you have to go through. It does take months and it takes a lot of time. But according to Feldman Criminal Defense, according to the city, this is referring to Chicago, 2017 gun trace report, about 60% of the city's guns are illegally obtained from out of state. This statistic highlights the fact that despite gun laws, guns can still be obtained by people who want them, and there will always be a risk of unlawful use. And I think this goes back to criminals are the main threat with guns, right? Like, would you agree?
Yes.
And criminals, no matter what the gun laws are, they will still find a way. And like in Chicago, which is pretty close to the deadliest city in America, 60% of the criminals who are committing crimes with guns own them illegally.
Right, and I can understand that increasing these background checks might not feel like enough, but the ease of getting a gun is actually a lot greater than what you might think. According to Phil Putt Jones, current federal laws allow for nearly anyone who is 18 years or older to legally purchase and own a gun with only a few restrictions. So I feel like even if illegal guns can still be obtained, something has to be done because the ease of access is too great. I've heard of stories where people bought a gun and then that same day went and shot up a church or something. Mm-hmm. And even though the student didn't actually commit on his threat, I've been in a school shooting threat scenario and it was terrifying. So I can sympathize with people who've lost loved ones from that, and I just want to try and save as many lives as possible.
I agree with you, and it is very tragic, and it's a really rough issue because you're dealing with a life-to-death scenario, but also there's a greater view that you need to understand that criminals don't always follow rules, and overall I think it's really important to protect people's freedom to be able to bear arms. But I totally see where you're coming from, and I really appreciate your points that you brought up today.